Well, good afternoon, everyone. The Nest Summit has been all about solutions, and one of the most fascinating panels is about to come up, and I wanted to share a little more background on it. In 2017, the Apparel Impact Institute was created to identify, fund, scale, measure solutions to address critical issues for people and for our planet. It is my great pleasure to introduce Louis Perkins, President and CEO of the Apparel Impact Institute. Please welcome Louis to the main stage.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Today I want to talk about ambition. The fashion industry, textile, apparel, and footwear sector has been on a journey towards sustainable fashion for well over a decade now. Some players have been pushing the movement further and longer. We've all been full of ambition and strong ambition. Ambition to build a thriving fashion industry driven by creativity and innovation, one that works better for all of us. One that delivers the choices we seek as caring citizens and customers, one that protects the men and women making our clothes, the one that works in harmony with the planet, not against it. And we're here today, not just in this room, but in our daily lives and our vocations, our avocations, because we have a shared vision and an ambition to solve for one of the biggest global challenges of our time. We acknowledge that climate crisis is real, and it's urgent that we throw all of our resources into it as quickly as possible. We all know that phasing out coal and other fossil fuels is a dire mandate, and it must become a reality. Our ambition has brought us this far. Over the last decade, the fashion industry has seen a lot of bold commitments. We've released reports to narrow in on the pathway and the size of the prize. A proliferation of new initiatives and working groups have emerged, bold new ideas, brilliant innovations, modest investment, and a lot of talk. And while the climate scientists continue to warn us that we're not doing enough, and we're definitely not doing it fast enough. The business community is getting the message, and at COP26 last November, thousands of corporate executives and entrepreneurs flooded into Glasgow, making even bolder commitments, and I'm sure we'll hear more in Egypt and at COP27. But we're becoming aware of a seismic shift, that businesses hold a tremendous power over what energy and clean technology transition looks like and how quickly it will succeed. Climate is, after all, connected to everything. Carbon emissions removal, yes, but also land use, biodiversity, water stewardship, and all the while our ambition is powerful, but without any action, we're not going to reach our targets. We can't get to where we agree to go and where we need to go. To the year 2030, with the fashion industry supply chain emissions cut in half. That's our first target. But today I'm here to talk about what we can do and how we're doing it, and how we're turning this ambition into real action, and how we're turning hope into how, specifically around how we're building an unprecedented collaborative of brands, retailers, and climate philanthropists, of venture capital, impact investors, banks, and other funds, of innovators for the next generation technologies and all types of climate solutions providers, all on board together for reshaping the fashion supply chain's future and doing it at the speed and scale we know that is necessary to meet the challenge at hand. Because the biggest challenge we face today is not a shortage of ambition, or ideas, or even money. The biggest challenge we face today is bringing the right players together, working together at the same table, and to bring the most powerful forces together, and to properly resource this work to unlock greater ambition and greater impact. So today I'm here to tell you that work is underway. AII was founded, as Bonnie said, to identify, fund, scale, and measure solutions for the industry to reach their environmental targets. For the last 4 years, we've been collaborating with industry and philanthropy to scale programs that will create the fashion supply chain of the future. Programs like Clean by Design, founded by the NRDC, carbon tech assessments, aggregated rooftop solar projects, and transitions to safer chemistry. We're running programs in major hotspots where about 70% or more of the carbon emissions are concentrated, such as mainland China, Taiwan region, Vietnam, South Korea, Pakistan, Bangladesh, India, Italy, and even North America. Our programs have unlocked roughly $175 million in sustainable finance in the supply chain and removed 1.5 million tons of carbon emissions per year. But we have to drive more, and we have to unlock more. So today we're talking about a new way, and we're going to tell you about a new way we're unleashing that power of collaboration, a new way to drive better capital into our clean production transition. In June of this year at the Global Fashion Agenda in Copenhagen, we announced a new era of climate finance for textile, apparel, and footwear industry supply chain. It's called the Fashion Climate Fund, and this is just the beginning, but over the coming months, we'll be telling you more about strategic partners that are joining this fund and working on decarbonization in textile, apparel, footwear production. And we're bringing this into the greatest community of practice that this industry has seen thus far, with necessary insights, knowledge, and the resources to get the job done. In the words of John Doerr from venture capital firm Kleiner Perkins, transparency seeds collaboration. The fund is designed to be both transparent and inclusive of all of our work. If you have a venture or a technology program or other solutions that's proven to get carbon out of the supply chain, then we want you with us. If you're looking to fund greater supply chain improvements and clean energy transition, we want you with us. This is a center of gravity for doing the hard work together in an open forum for complete transparency, sharing what works and what does not work, and applying a design thinking approach to moving ideas and concepts from into proven and ready, piloting, sharing, replicating, and implementing. With this unprecedented commitment, the companies here today with me are leading this fashion fund towards the goal of $250 million in grant-making capacity to spend down over the next 7 years. The funds will be deployed into the supply chain where we scale the industry's most promising proven solutions, and the fund will help de-risk investments for these solutions, which can attract and unlock an estimated $2 billion in new working capital. This is the kind of investment required for the industry to reach our science-based targets, but it's just getting started. You'll hear us talk about the report that we wrote called Unlocking the $1 trillion Opportunity to Decarbonize Fashion. This fund is the tip of the spear to get started toward that goal. And we're pleased that HSBC is going to join us today with the brands to talk about the work they've been doing with us. All the while, we're seeking to ensure climate justice for citizens and communities where the fashion is made. And while the fund will expand the breadth of climate action programming and expertise globally, such as expanding clean energy projects, solving for coal elimination, implementing regenerative practices, all to lower carbon emissions, this is how we're going to prepare the industry for what's coming down the policy pipeline. What we're funding with this $250 million over the next 7 years is we're funding solutions that are proven and ready for scale, like material efficiency, preferred materials, energy efficiency, and renewable electricity. And we're funding innovation gaps from pre-seed to pilot phase, such as next generation materials, renewable thermal heat technologies, dry processing technologies, and others that are eliminating the use of on-site burning of coal. And we're building strategic partnerships with traditional capital in order to create a verified portfolio of solutions, de-risked, in demand, and ready for financing to meet the rapid timeline. By demonstrating the financial viability of these solutions and connecting these financial institutions to the facilities and the technology providers, the $250 million will play a critical role in unlocking this other $1.75 billion of debt and equity financing. To better keep track of and better manage the work and use of funds, we're currently developing what we're calling the Climate Solutions Portfolio, which is a registry of verified programs, projects, tools, and solutions across early, mid, and late stage development by region for lowering carbon in a quantified and verified and transparent way. This registry will be aligned to proven solutions to the right asset class of investment, from grant making to subsidy to lending and to equity. We call this blended capital. And the 250 have combined catalytic resources to de-risk and prove investments of the unlock for the roughly $2 billion in blended capital are part of the crucial solution strategy. Because not one of us has what it takes to do it alone. Even the size of the companies that are with us today, they can't do this work alone. This is the beginning of aggregating a higher level of resources that we need to get the job done. And if you hear your work in this call to action, then we want you with us. So take a look.
We all live fashion. It's part of every single person's life. From the runways to the streets to fitness. Fashion is everywhere. But industrialization has consequences. It's time to step out and stand up for change. Today, a new era begins, focused on our planet, our communities, and our people. It's time to make a change. Tomorrow's fashion is innovative, clean, and regenerative. We are ready to step into the future. This is how we begin. We are calling for $250 million to unlock $2 billion in capital. We have commitments. We have big brands and foundations. Today, we begin a new fashion future on the pathway to decarbonization. Join us.
All right, so today we're going to be joined by several of our first round lead partners, H&M Group, Lululemon, along with the H&M Foundation, and Eric and Wendy Schmidt from their family foundation have launched the fund in Copenhagen this year. And today I'm really pleased to also add to the stage our new lead partner, PVH, the parent company for Tommy Hilfiger, Calvin Klein, and other flagship brands. And we'll be joining these lead partners together to accelerate data-driven, science-based approach to achieving decarbonization by 2050 and reaching the first milestone of 50% carbon emissions by 2030. This is the beginning group. This group is going to grow and get larger. That's the intent, is that we need all of the major suppliers with the most concentrated and large supply chain working together. Ambition has got us to this start. These leaders have launched the fund. They're putting in the initial major funding, and together we're calling for more peer corporations and climate philanthropists to join the call for the total of $250 million spent down over the 7 years and unlocking the total $2 billion. Now it's time for us to get more engagement, greater action, increased corporate finance, and we invite you all to join us. If you want more details on the fund, you can go to our website, fashionclimatefund.org, and you can contact us through LinkedIn or other media sources. We have the solutions out there. We know we just need to get them to scale, and we need to address this issue together. So now I'd like to introduce Rachel Cernansky from Vogue Business, who's going to moderate our panel and also call the other panelists to join me, who will introduce themselves when we come up.
Thanks, Louis. It's great to be here.
Do you want to switch places?
Yeah, actually,
Okay.
so I don't have to be turning around. Thanks, everyone, for being here. Let's get started. I'm echoing a little bit. All right, so each of you is here today due to your company or organization's public commitment to science-based targets and ESG finance. Can each of you talk about how your work with AII, the Apparel Impact Institute, will help you achieve your goals? And we'll start with Mallory, given the PVH news today.
And maybe each of us announce our name and
yes,
title.
and sorry.
Great, thanks.
Also, everyone introduce yourself.
Mallory McConnell, I'm with PVH Corp.
Ulrika Leverenz, I'm head in Green Investment at H&M Group.
Crispin Wong, I'm the Senior Director of Product Sustainability and Environment at Lululemon.
And Kelly Fisher, I'm the Head of Corporate Sustainability for HSBC in the US.
Yeah, so I think to get to the question of how this work helps us reach our target, so we've been long-time supporters and founders of AII, and really truly believe in collective action. I think we know that we're not going to achieve our goals without the support of others in our industry, and really need to collaborate on shared solutions to systemic problems that we have. So, as we've worked over the years to kind of scale some of the programming that directly in our factories, I think we've started to realize that, there's technology gaps and innovation gaps that we need to solve as an industry. So really looking at the fund for that type of opportunity. And then really also unlock debt and equity that we need for our suppliers to make these types of investments. So really getting other programs to scale. So, really excited about the fund, really excited about the opportunity to work collaboratively with our peers and make impact.
Ulrika?
So we see a gap between our Scope 3 targets and the pace that our textile suppliers or factories will make the transition. And in order to close that gap or bridge that gap, we need to support our suppliers. We need to support them both financial, but very important, with technical solutions. We need to help them with suggestion on how to reduce emissions and what techniques to use. And there are several new or half-new techniques out there that needs to be piloted, but also that needs to be scaled to have an industry size. And we are a fashion retailer. We are not really experts in doing so, but the AII Fund can help us in doing that. And so make way for and plan for investments. Also, we share suppliers with many brands that have the same Scope 3 targets, so it makes sense that we join forces and are in this together.
Crispin, before we go to you, I just want to explain for people who may not be familiar with how the fashion industry sort of operates. I think brands will set goals, ambitious targets for carbon reductions for 2025, 2030, 2050, and you depend on suppliers to meet them. Yes. Like you can't reduce your carbon emissions without the suppliers you manufacture with to reduce theirs. So just for people who may not be familiar with this sort of setup, and so the shared supply, I think you can get used to just how things work, but and so shared suppliers, to your point, because you have hundreds of different people that you source for, or companies, suppliers that you source from. So this idea of bringing companies together to help each different supplier make those changes. So, Crispin?
Yeah, I think that's important context. I mean, very similar. We like the platform that AI provides to collaborate with other brands and be in conversation with our suppliers, because it really streamlines the goals and the targets that we're working towards. And it helps, especially with the fund, accelerates known solutions in energy efficiency and transitioning to renewable energy, which we need to hit our climate targets, but then also to fill some of those innovation gaps, which we need to figure out how to speed up the innovation pipeline so that we can land them faster.
We'll come back to the bank, the role of the bank in a minute. So, Louis, you made the announcement in June at the Global Fashion Summit. How much progress has there been in these first few months?
Yeah, so once it's interesting, we'd been working on this concept for a donor collaborative fund or a donor pooled fund for the fashion industry for 3 or 4 years since we started the organization, and we'd already been doing this work just with a smaller budget. So we'd already been scaling these solutions and technologies. Everyone here had been working with us already, but at a smaller scale. And so before the pandemic, we were like, okay, we got to put something together. And the pandemic hit, and we thought, okay, now are we going to find that climate is actually on the back burner because of the pandemic? We found obviously the contrary due to a lot of attention on the fragility of the supply chains, and as we saw the impact. And so when we launched the fund in the fall, we had a good 4 years of kind of strategy and development underneath us. But then we now had this ability to say, okay, let's start leaning in. So a lot of it is around creating infrastructure. I mentioned in the talk about building this climate solutions portfolio. The concept of this also is looking at these interventions across these 6 key levers. And we had put together a report with World Resource Institute on the roadmap to net zero, which is kind of the framework for the fund. So our ability to now start operationalizing it means we need to look at how much use of funds are going to go into each of those categories. So we've been working with a couple key groups from Blue Sky Consultancy on that development of a technology tool that would be the climate solutions portfolio, getting it ready. These folks at the table are part of that. We also have other brands that are part of the funding and working group on that to help build this. And the idea is that every solution or technology that's out there and every project and program that's working towards this is actually transparent, that you can actually defragment the multitude of initiatives and query, okay, I'm in Vietnam, I'm looking at power purchase agreements, what's out there, what's working, who's operating, et cetera. So all that sort of development of the infrastructure of that's been going on this summer as we're preparing to launch it as a beta in 2023. So that's been a big part of it. And then just developing ourselves as a donor pooled fund and looking at ourselves in the same way that other collaborations have come around. Historically, big foundations will launch these types of funds, and we thought, what we need is the fashion industry to actually set aside both corporate treasury dollars that would be unlocking their supply chain sourcing budgets and actually growing those supply chain sourcing budgets. So these are budgets to do the improvements in the supply chain, and then complementing it with philanthropic funds. We needed bigger money. So all that's going to take governance. It's going to take sort of rules of engagement, process, policies. We want to do all this transparently. We want people to see how we're doing decision making, what the criteria is for investment from early, mid to late stage on grant making, and then how that becomes criteria for debt or equity as well. So all that means, we don't want to make this up on the fly. So we've been working very closely with a philanthropy advisory group, Geneva Global, who works with some of the world's largest foundations on setting up these donor collaborative funding models. So a large part of my work this summer has been really leaning in with them on building out this strategic process for governance policy, related to process, et cetera. And at the same time, recruiting others to the table. So PVH announced today, which is very exciting, and Vogue Business had that article today. Thank you, Rachel. But we've got several other major brand retailers who are coming in too, so a good bit of effort just to work with their corporate treasury teams, their foundations, and philanthropy. So that's been a lot of the infrastructure. And now applying the first year use of funds into project work is next. And so we're all coming together next week as our first sort of brand meeting to start looking at, how we start applying the funds into the project work. The good news is we already have programs running. We have a carbon tech assessment that baselines carbon in factories that we're scaling. We have a clean by design program, which is energy, water, and chemical management efficiency. So we know that the first use of funds will go into those programs, but then building out that greater infrastructure for what do you do with increased funding per year. And
Louis, I'm going to stop you.
yes, stop me. He's going to keep talking and take up all the time. I'm not excited.
Yeah, I mean, I do want to hear about where the funds are going, but we do have to move on. And there's a really sort of important topical issue, I think, that we need to talk about that the world has been paying a lot of attention to lately, and that is greenwashing. There's been a lot of heat on the industry, especially in the last few months. The Norwegian government criticized H&M of making false claims about the sustainability of its products in June. Lululemon has faced criticisms of unethical fossil fuel consumption. PVH has faced criticisms, and the list can go on and on. So how do we? So critics might look at this fund and think that it's just another way to kind of generate positive press. So how do we know that this is not that this fund is not that?
Yeah, I can start. Yeah, so we had been, I think that Louis mentioned this, we had been participating in programs to scale known solutions around energy efficiency and transitioning to different types of thermal heat. And I think it was an easy next step for us to accelerate the work because this is action-based. And sometimes in the industry, it's hard to find action and implementation-based organizations, and that's what AII, that's their core focus. And so I think that's super important, and then continuing to collaboration on innovation. So hopefully we'll be able to start getting the sign out there to attract innovators and investors in to accelerate the work we need.
Yeah, I would add to that. I mean, I think we look at the fund as a yes and, right? We still have our science-based targets, and we're still activating work to work against those and make improvements. I think we recognize the need for an enabling platform, which is really what the fund starts to act as. And so, we're excited to be able to contribute, but are still going to be transparent and diligent about working towards our Scope 3 targets.
Yeah, same here. We have a lot of activities, but in this case, we don't want to focus on anything than the real problem, and the real problem is that it doesn't go quick enough to reduce the emissions, and we need help in doing so. We need the technologies scaled, and we need to have connection between our suppliers and finance means. And this is what this fund will be able to do. And it's all about collaboration and transparency. And as a contributor, we will also work very actively in the fund. So no, we're not afraid of that.
And I love to be the person that pokes the bear in the room. One of my favorite things about all the events I've attended this week is how happily dismissive CSR leaders and sustainability leaders of the big brands have been of this sort of smokescreen of doubt around ESG. I think it is absolutely counterintuitive and counterproductive. I mean, the way I look at it, if you were drowning and I stood on the shore next to the only flotation device, and instead of throwing it to you, I said, well, wait a second. I know you're drowning, but I'm just going to check and see if the stitching on it is good and see if it really floats. I'm going to go down the shore and see if there are any better ones. And I mean, will it really even float meanwhile you're drowning? The world is drowning. So let's stop and think about the people who are putting up that argument and what their intentions are. Now, that's not to say there aren't some really well-intentioned people that want to make sure that when we call something green, when we call something ESG, that it truly is having the right impact. So I throw you the flotation device, and then maybe afterwards we talk about why you were drowning, whether that was the right thing to give to you, whether we should have more of them. But I don't take time out of things that are really causing and making a difference, right? And so I think we need to come together and say, okay, let people who are analyzing that do their work. But this fund, and working with Louis and the Apparel Impact Institute, is about exactly what they're trying to have the backlash be against. Real, credible, tactile, on-the-ground solutions. It's very, very hard to argue with those.
Let's stay with the banking, I guess with you, Kelly, for just a minute. HSBC has set a goal of providing $1 trillion of financing towards decarbonization projects. What challenges are you facing in reaching that goal? I mean, are there enough projects to meet the brand's financial and environmental criteria?
So far, we're not actually seeing any challenges. We're at nearly $200 billion, and we just announced it in 2020. Okay. So not a problem. To my point about making sure, though, that things are credible, we were one of the first banks to announce a sustainable finance target. It was $100 billion back in 2018. We're very careful, but we count towards that, though. We were the first bank to bring in assurance of PwC. We also use EY to assure our sustainable supply chain finance. So not a challenge to get to the 1 trillion, but we're very cognizant of wanting to be very transparent about what goes into that. So if anyone's interested, you can look up our data dictionary online about what we count, just in case you're having trouble sleeping at night, right? You really want to do that. But more importantly, and more relevant to this talk today, and why I'm so excited to be here and to work with these brands, especially PVH, who we announced a sustainable supply chain finance program with back in, was that June? Yeah, it's been a quick summer. Is HSBC is the world's biggest trade bank. And before you all kind of have your eyes glaze over and she's going to talk about trade really, really is important. And I wanted to quote a stat that was in a great article last weekend in the business section of the Times about climate change and what it's doing to supply chains. And the WTO Director General said, trade is a mechanism for adaptation and resilience that can help countries deal with agriculture challenges and natural disasters. But more importantly, climate change is on track to contribute to severe malnutrition. As many as 55 million people by 2050 are at risk. But responsible and effective trade around the world could reduce that number by half. And that's just looking at the amount of people who could be hungry. That's only looking at the food supply chain. So it's important to HSBC that we are, as that leading trade bank, a responsible trade partner. And so that's why we do things like the sustainable supply chain finance programs. But it's also why blended finance is so important. I think Louis has done a great job of explaining that. It's about, I'm on the philanthropy side, I'm not a banker, if you couldn't tell. But I use philanthropy to catalyze the stuff that I then believe our clients and our bankers will step in, and their treasury colleagues will step in then and say, you've proven that these work, and now we believe there's a financial ROI on it. And that's what's, I think, really exciting for us.
Let's talk more about the strategy, because HSBC has formed partnerships with individual brands. Is there something more strategic in funding the Apparel Impact Institute's work and being at the table as a group of brands? Yeah,
it's a great question, Rachel. We talk about it a lot. So I'll dumb down what sustainable finance trade is, because none of my bankers are here to tell me that I oversimplified it. But what we do with, for example, with brands like PVH is sustainable supply chain finance just means we were already paying their suppliers, and we were, paying them, and then eventually PVH would pay us back. It occurred to someone years ago, someone who I actually worked with, who was my mentor in this, that we could pay them differently based on how sustainable they were, based on how much they were polluting the world and how they were treating the human beings that were making those products. And PVH, by the way, were the first ones to combine both the human and the environmental element, which was really exciting for us. But we're doing it with Walmart, Puma, Levi's, many others. And it really does hopefully have a game-changing influence on the supply chain. But we hope that that's just the beginning, and we want to get deeper into everyone's supply chains all the way down through many, many tiers. And we want it to be a collective effort rather than it would seem like it's just a way for the bank to make money, but we actually would be happy if every single supply chain finance program was sustainable, because we see very little reason for it not to be. So what AII could give us is the chance for us all to come together and say, this is what good looks like, so that when we apply finance to it, it's not apples and oranges and kiwi fruit and pineapples, but it's all the same standards. But then collectively, we could potentially pool our capital and change pockets of the world that are where there are large apparel supply chains, and really actually not only make every supply chain sustainable, but make the need for the bank to do this work obsolete.
Has this work been going on long enough to measure the impact? Do you know if it's driving reductions?
It's a great question. Yeah, the first partner we announced in 2018 was Walmart. And because they know their suppliers so well, they do measure the impact. First and foremost, they were shocked by how many of their suppliers signed up. It's voluntary. So that's the great thing. You don't force your suppliers to do it. And they thought, there'd be some takers from like the brands in the world like Hanes that have really done a lot of work in this. They were overwhelmed by how positive the response was and how many of their suppliers wanted to sign up. So the impact was tangible. They could see the impact it was having on those suppliers. And it was becoming too easy to be a gigaguru, which is how Walmart evaluates their top. So last summer, we announced that we were re-upping the program with CDP's help and putting the CDP rating on it to say, we're going to make it even harder for you to get that favorable rate.
CDP being the database of sort of
one of the most credible ratings, right? One of the most difficult, and none of us have any control over it because they rate us without us being participants, and they give us an A or whatever grade. So it's considered one of the most credible and widely used. Yeah, thanks, Rachel, for keeping us on.
Yeah. The acronyms can get lost. So let's see. Some brands want to or have been providing loans or funds to suppliers directly to do some of the work that we're talking about. Does that make sense? To go sort of individually, or like why take the approach of the fund? Maybe Louis, let's start with you. But
Yeah. I think one of the things we know, when we did produce this report, you can go on our website and find it, called "Unlocking the $1 Trillion Opportunity to Decarbonize." Is it's going to take like all hands on deck and all forms of funds, all types of capital, all types of creative, unique ways to do this. And if we're moving fast, there may be some real benefits to looking at a lot of ways to deploy funding. The power of what we think this fund is sort of a first step in, is really the ability to unlock the inventory of proven solutions, to find the ones that are like, hey, this is scalable, we're just not in Vietnam yet, or hey, this is scalable, we're just not in Italy yet, or versus this is a technology that we don't even know if it works. It's working in another industry. We need to apply it. We need to test it, pilot it, et cetera. And this is the work of grant making. This is the work, as Kelly said, of like that first in dollar that doesn't need an ROI. It actually takes the ROI off of some of the other investments. Some ventures or projects might have bundled this type of activity in, and it allows it to not require a return. But what it does is moves a concept from hypothesis towards proven solution. Or it says it's a proven solution, we just need to build the capacity in this country. We need to align the right experts, the right technical approach. We need to go into the facilities, recruit them, et cetera. And so all that's grant making. So from our perspective, that's the first money in, and that's where you want to get started. But it doesn't mean that if you don't have larger budgets as a company and you want to say, hey, look, we have some preferred suppliers we'd like to play some other tools with, we'd like to consider doing some lending models with them directly, or secure loans with a bank like HSBC, that's going to have to happen too. So I'd love to hear how others are thinking about why you chose to join such a big catalytic grant-making engine, and how that also informs the work in the other areas. And I'm looking at Ulrika.
Yeah.
Talked about this a lot.
Exactly, we talked about that a lot. So we have this lending scheme. We have a program where suppliers can apply for funding for projects that will reduce their emissions. And what we do in evaluating those business cases is not to look at the financial gain. We only look at the actual emission reductions. But again, we're not the only brand that is sourcing at these suppliers. We are sharing suppliers with many other brands. And again, it will be actually much smarter if we go together. And then you could ask yourself, what can then a brand do in a fund or in the relationship together with banks? First of all, the brands will know or could give examples or suggestions on the investments that should be done. The brands can connect suppliers with banks. We have a relationship with the suppliers already, which is good. And the third one is that we might be able to reduce a bit of the perceived risk, and so make room for lower interest rates charged to the brands, because we have information about the brands, but we also might be able to go in with a guarantee or a collateral.
Does someone want to explain why there would be a perceived risk? What seems risky for a supplier to take this on?
If to give a loan for these kind of investments might be a potential longer loan than the actual brand can promise to have a relationship with the supplier, because these are usually how the agreements are made. It's more relatively flexible. A payoff of an investment, let's say solar thermal, could be 25 years. But if we are a group of brands that are, then we will collectively have work together with this particular supplier.
Yeah. I mean, I think just to add to that, I think there's opportunity for a variety of models, right? And a need for a variety of models. Like apparel supply chains are complex. They're big. We have different relationships with different suppliers at different levels. And so what works for one may not work for another. And I think we need kind of all hands on deck in terms of how we're going to approach this issue. I think going back to Lewis's point about kind of the ROI and first dollar in, so we made our contribution actually through the PVH Foundation, and we're really excited to do that because, again, I think we believe that there is a need to have a solutions in a portfolio of tested, vetted, proven options for suppliers. You know, we still obviously have an operational budget that we need to maintain so that we're making investments directly in our supply chain so that we're hitting our targets. But yeah, I would just say I think there's a lot of different models. Banks have a huge role to play as we start to think about, you know, the impact that we really need to drive and the speed in which we need to do that.
Yeah. Let's talk about the actual solutions that we are sort of talking around right now, because we've talked about proven and unproven solutions. What does that mean exactly? And, you know, are there any examples of the kind of unproven solutions that you might be looking to identify?
Want me to start video on it? Yeah. So when I've referenced this two reports, the WRI report on the roadmap to net zero and then the $1 trillion report for decarbonizing. So both reports are based on a framework of the solutions by category of where the carbon exists in the supply chain. So supply chain can be defined a couple ways, but we define it in 4 tiers, from the farm level or raw material extrusion. So whether it's poly or whether it's cotton, you know, it's that raw material input. And then it goes into yarn preparation, which is tier 4, tier 3. Then into fabric preparation, the mills, tier 2. By the way, that's where most of the carbon is because of the burning on-site boilers to get temperatures hot enough for processing fabrics. That's where coal is being burned or other things are being burned. So that's like the big red flag area. And then finally the cut and sew, which is primarily electricity, some laundering, some heat, but primarily electricity for cut and sew. And that's the final stage. So we looked at where the carbon is, and we looked at what's proven and what's not proven. And the 6 categories for potential opportunity investment are from farm or raw material input all the way to cut and sew, are material efficiency across all of it, preferred materials, better materials, recycled cotton, poly, et cetera, better materials with lower carbon and environmental footprint as an input, next generation materials, which is going to be a lot around circular economy materials and new types of forms of cellulosics, man-made cellulosics, and all coming from agro waste and all kinds of cool materials you're reading about in Vogue because there's lots of cool stories coming out. And then that's the material side. And then when you look at the buildings or the actual facilities, we have clean electricity across all those buildings and facilities, and then you have the thermal heat piece. And so there's energy efficiency, there's transition to clean electricity or renewable electricity, and then there's the renewable thermal heat or other dry processing technologies, waterless dye technologies, ways in which we can stop burning things on site to process fabrics. And that's 52% of the carbon according to our report.
Yeah.
So we're looking at proven and unproven in all of that.
Thermal heat being just giant.
Thermal
vats of
heat being the
water
giant one, and
that you
a
have.
good percentage of our resources in this fund is going to go towards that area as we also unlock clean electricity as
Do you
well.
want to explain what thermal heat is for people who may not?
Why don't I let one of the brands describe thermal heat? Who knows
And
the
if you're
most?
finding solutions.
Yeah, I'm
Right,
with you.
exactly.
Yeah, so it's usually machines like boilers that generate steam for high pressure, high heat processes, like what we need to dye textiles. So I think it's important to call out it's not only generating heat, but also the unproven technologies are all of the amazing machinery that people are dreaming up around how you revolutionize how we process textiles, which is the exciting space.
Yeah, and it's important because this is one of the questions I first asked when I went from the circular economy design side to the where the sausage is made side. I was like, wait, why can't we just use renewable electricity for this? And recognizing that current technologies under renewable energy or solar panels don't get the temperatures hot enough to do the processing. That's changing and can change, and there are some cool technologies out there that we need to have philanthropic dollars to go in and pilot in all these factories. So that's a large part of what we'll be doing is like identifying what's out there that can disrupt that so that we can start to bring that kind of form of heat, renewable thermal heat in. Or the elimination, there's dry processing technologies being tested in denim and other areas where you don't even need water, and so looking at what you can do to actually, or heat, so you start looking at what other technologies are out there.
So cutting out the need to have to heat up a bunch of water in the first place. You don't even need the water.
Yeah, so so obviously this is a climate impact that has carbon emissions and a huge impact on water scarcity issues, water stewardship, clean available drinking water in regions. It has a huge impact on land use, biodiversity, air quality, and so getting this piece solved for is going to be a big change agent for this.
So you all sort of, speak inside baseball quite a bit. Is there a role for the consumer in this conversation? How do you engage with the public about this kind of issue?
I mean, the media has a huge role to transmit these stories, which is why I'm really glad you're here. I went to events with Forbes and New York Times this week. I think we need the information out there. Because I think there's a lot of misinformation where consumers go. So I think you have such an important role to play. But I also think that consumers need to not look for the sexy, but for the sustainable. And the stuff that Louis is talking about is so important. It reminds me of when Mike Bloomberg was the mayor of New York City, and he had this plan NYC. And there were all these really fun initiatives. I sponsored one at Toyota, the Million Trees. He painted all the roofs white. But actually, when he left office, the most effective thing he'd done was buried on page 36, and it was about, he just changed the way buildings were heated. A bunch of low-income and apartment housing, buildings across the city were heated. And it was actually the most impactful, and it was buried because it was kind of a yawn, right? And so I hope customers start to seek out the substantive story instead of the flashy. There's something about me, just because I've been fortunate enough to work with all the people on this stage and many others to educate me about seeing yet another story about, no offense to this, it's great, but a company that isn't sustainable in any way, but they have one t-shirt that's made with 100% plastic recycled bottles. The stuff that Louis is talking about when he referred to it as that, whereas the sausage is made, consumers need to realize that that's actually where the really important work is happening.
Thanks.
I will inject an opinion there because I think that there's, renewable energy is that is a proven solution, right? And we can do it. We just, suppliers need money or policymakers in manufacturing countries need to implement policies, but that's not something that as a brand you can put on a label that people will get excited about, so there's a
Yeah, I think there's a need to help educate the right narrative around this too, because we all want to be held accountable. I want our fund to be accountable, all that we're doing measured, verified data, the carbon emission. I should be producing a report every year that tells you every dollar that was spent and how it removed carbon or what percentage did, what the cost of carbon was by category or investment. Hold us accountable. And the same for the brands. We're not going fast enough. So let's go faster. But I think part of what we can do for consumers is start to educate them on what the transition to clean energy and technology looks like across what pipeline. timeline and what the barriers are to get there. And I think that's the conversation we want to have for sure, and then we all want to be held accountable to that.
Yeah, I think that's great. And look, I think we have a responsibility as large fashion brands in the industry to do this work. So, it's great when we can tell a story about it, but that's not what drives the work.
Yeah. We are just about out of time. Do you want to go around with one quick closing thought?
No, I mean, I'm happy to be here and working with other brands and hoping that this results in real change and that any of the innovators or people with proven solutions really see this as a call to action with us.
Yeah.
What she said. No, but the same. We have been longing for having the possibility to have a joint action, and now we have.
Yeah, just
Yeah.
join us.
Join us, yeah. So you can find me on LinkedIn, send me a note. Come work with us.
Lewis's
we need
personal
everybody.
address is, his home phone number is.
Great.
Well, great conversation. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.